Welcome down the Horn with Charley Armey. I'm your host, Gary Emmett. We've been talking football. Charley was a scout in the NFL, and he coached, grew up in North Dakota, Candu, North Dakota, and ended up being a general manager for the St. Louis Rams and won the Super Bowl. And being an old Rams fan that I am, I go back a long time when we had a really dry spell, but thanks to Charley, they ended up winning the Super Bowl in St. Louis. So, Charley, welcome back to On the Horn.
Thank you. Glad to be here. It's always fun to talk about football. What's the exciting things that can happen every Sunday? Something new and something you don't expect happens in pro football. So it's fun to talk about.
It is. And, Charley, I want to start out with, before we talk about the Rams, you sent me a copy of a book you wrote a chapter in. And the name of the book's called The Business of Sports. And you wrote a chapter called Inside and Outside, Corporate America versus the Sports Industry. And I just found this book fascinating because in the chapter you talked about, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've done a lot of things. Some of them work, some of them didn't. Win some, you lose some, you fail, you succeed. But it's always about getting up and going back to work and working through the process. But so often as a business owner, you can fix things. You have a lot of things under your control. But in football, you pointed out some differences that I had never thought about, because while you have a business and you have ticket sales and you have contracts and you got to pay the players, those are all business aspects. But as you just started, when we started here, any given Sunday, the wheels can come off. All kinds of things happen outside of everyone's control, which all of a sudden this week I saw that Aaron Rodgers might have broke something in his wrist in his left hand. They're first in their division. All of a sudden, that's not good. There's problems. Talk to us a little bit about the challenges of that, because you got fans and all of a sudden they're fickle and they don't like your quarterback and they're mad at the coach. And those are all variables outside of the control of just doing business.
Now, there's a saying in football, especially among successful football coaches, you can't be successful unless you've overcome failure. So everybody's in this business at some point or another has experienced failure and has to overcome it in order to be successful. But I can give you one great story I was telling you earlier about Bob Phillips. He was the coach of the Houston Oilers, and Tom Landry was the Dallas Cowboys. They were talking about, they were getting ready to play each other, and they asked Bob about the game. And he said, the only thing I can tell you about Coach Landry is he could take his team and beat yours, and then he could take your team and beat his. So being a great coach has a lot to do with the success. And we're going to talk a little bit today, what makes a great coach and how do you find the guy that's the great coach. So I'm looking forward to putting some of that stuff together for you.
Yeah, I love thinking through that, Charley, because we're going to focus on the Rams because you played a major part in that. And I think it's funny because when I interviewed your brother, Dick Armey, and we talked about Washington, D.C. being the majority leader and his role in revolutionizing a lot of things in Washington, which was an amazing time. He mentioned you, and he mentioned about the fact that St. Louis is finally going to be, now that you're general manager, they're finally going to have a chance to win the Super Bowl. And here it goes. You show up in St. Louis as the general manager and help pull off a Super Bowl. I think that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, putting a team together like that is a very tough thing to do in the National Football League. First of all, you have to identify what your problems are. And your problems aren't always on the football field. Your problems are probably within the organization. You have to, first of all, find out what's the commitment of ownership. Are they committed to building a quality franchise, or are they happy with just going along and doing the best they can do? Or is their commitment 100% in? And we were lucky with Georgia owned the Rams, and we were lucky when John Shaw was our president, was trying to figure out how to put together a winning program, that Georgia was all in. She just gave him an open checkbook, says, get what you need and whatever it costs. That was one of the first hurdles that we had to overcome, and we overcame it because of her attitude, what she wanted to do and what she wanted to achieve. The next thing you got to do, before you even get on the football field and start thinking about anything else, you got to identify the problems within the organization. And there's a lot of problems inside your organizations that can hold you back. And you have to look at your whole organization, who's committed, who's not committed, where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, and how you attack those weaknesses. And the most important, most specifically important thing about any football team, as I told you in our previous interview, the focal point of all teams, regardless of what the structure is, the head football coach. He's the key. And if you can find the right football coach that can put all these things together, you have a real good chance to succeed. John Shaw recognized the fact that we got to find the right coach to run this football team if we want to achieve our success. We've already lost about 14 games in a row to the 49ers, and we're tired of getting beat by them every time we turn around. You have to look for the qualities. And the number one quality, I think, which really helped him was he was tired of hiring this coach and that coach because he was a good coordinator or somebody recommended this guy. He made up his mind he wanted somebody that had been there and done that. And as he started looking over the landscape of the coaches that were available, it popped into his mind he was very familiar with Dick Vermeil from his days when he coached at UCLA and then when he went on to Philadelphia. And he's found a pattern in his mind that this is a coach wherever he's been, success follows. In other words, he built teams in small colleges, he built teams in big college. Then he went in and rebuilt the Philadelphia football team and took them to the Super Bowl. That was the guy he identified as a guy that he thought could turn our program around. Now the next big problem is how to get Dick Vermeil out of retirement. And so he started to do conversations with Dick about coming and taking over our football team. And then Dick looked at it from his perspective, and Dick Vermeil is maybe the greatest coach I've worked for, and I've worked for a lot of great coaches. But the one thing he asked John Shaw, do I have complete control over the football operation? Who I hire that has anything to do with on the field football operation. And if I can't get that commitment from the ownership and from you, I can't build you a winning football team. And luckily, John Shaw gave him complete control over everything that has to do with the football operation. That includes making the final selection on his assistant coaches, staff members, trainers, strength coaches, scouting department. Everything had to come under Dick Vermeil's control. He felt as if he was going to build a winning football program. That was step number one. But getting Dick Vermeil to commit to that was step number two. And finally, when they got him to commit to that, then we were on the road. And the road is not going to be easy, as we'll get into it as we start talking more about what it takes to develop a football team. We now have a coach. Now we've got to figure out how to build a football team.
Charlie, I think when you were talking about the ownership buying in, I've spent a lot of time in Arizona, being a North Dakota kid. We sometimes try to sneak out in the winter. And of course, you're living down in Arizona, so you know exactly what I'm talking about, being a North Dakota boy. The Arizona Cardinals, they were always so critical because I think it was the Bidwells were the owners of that team for many years. And a lot of the locals just said they weren't committed to winning. They would do all these gimmicks to get, and that was pre-Kurt Warner and that early on when I was quite a bit younger. So we would always hear this locally that they always try to get people in the stands by gimmicks, not about putting a great coach on the field with a great team. And I'm not sure that was legitimate. I'm just saying as just a fan that would watch a team. But when you were talking about what Georgia did there and what you did in St. Louis with the Rams, that really resonated with me.
The thing about it, the commitment from ownership is significant because you got a lot of owners who, I'll give you an example. When the Dallas Cowboys hired Jimmy Johnson, gave him complete control of all the football operations, they built a great football team and winning Super Bowls. When Jimmy Johnson retired from coaching and then the ownership decided they were going to run the football program, you have people running the football program that don't really understand the ins and the outs and the structure of how to hire coaches, what commitment you're looking for, the philosophies, and so on and so forth. Again, it all boils down to having the right person at the right helm as the head coach. And I used to tell all our people, it's a big universe, pro football team, but there's only one focal point. If you don't have the right guy at the focal point, you're not going to win. When I was with Bill Parcells, he was the right guy, the right focal point, and he came in to be the head coach at Patriots when I was there, and it wasn't long before we went to the Super Bowl with the Patriots. And with Parcells as the head coach. And Parcells would have taken 3 teams to the Super Bowl, 3 different teams. They're playing the Seattle Seahawks to see who goes to the Super Bowl. And then if they kick the field goal, they're on their way to the Super Bowl. And the holder for the kicker, fumbles the snap and they miss the kick. And then Seattle goes to the Super Bowl. But having the right coach, that's the focal point. And now we're going to talk about how that guy, what he does to build the football team. And of course, I'm going to use Dick Vermeil as the example because we're talking about the St. Louis Rams and how we achieved our success.
So, Charlie, we're going to go to the break, and we come back. I'm going to want to pivot from that because just for a quick question, the 1999 season ends, and then, of course, the Super Bowl's in 2000. That's the year they won the Super Bowl, and you were general manager during that season. That's what we're going to lock in on. And when did you show up in St. Louis? What year?
I came with Dick Vermeil in 1997.
1990. So 1997.
I originally came, Dick brought me in originally to straighten out the personnel department.
We're talking football, NFL football. We're talking St. Louis Rams. And so, Charlie, before the break, we started talking a little bit about Dick Vermeil. And I remember the Mark Wahlberg movie where he picks the guy up, he's bartending. But I saw Dick Vermeil in a different light. And I remembered him when he was coaching the Rams. I was a big Rams fan, of course, as I've said before. But he was a wild man. And when he showed up in Philadelphia, and they didn't like him at first. They came after him pretty hard. But he's quite an impressive individual, isn't he?
He's dedicated to what he believes in. His number one philosophy is we got to go to work. He learned that from his father. You don't achieve anything if you don't work hard and go and have goals and achieve success. And when he first went to Philadelphia, in the end, a lot of the same things happened with the Rams. He went in to change the culture of the football team and the work habits and the attitude and everything. And like you were saying, originally people look at that, and people within the organization look at that as being too aggressive and too motivated. And what Dick would always know, how are you going to get to success if you don't work and achieve the little things within the organization? And how he built that team is similar to how we built the St. Louis Rams. And it's quite an accomplishment when you start studying Dick Vermeil's philosophy of how to do things. It's very interesting what he achieved and how he achieved it.
So tell us about, he came in, you came with him, and you said you had to change the personnel department. You had to fix that. Talk to us. What does that mean, and what did you do to do that?
When they brought me in with the Rams, they had, first of all, their personnel department, as far as I originally came in to fix the pro personnel department, because I really didn't have in other words, working with free agency, finding out that make sure you understand all the players in the National Football League that are available. You can pick up either as a trade or as somebody cuts the wrong player and you can find them. They didn't have a well-established personnel department as far as the pro side went. And he originally brought me in. We got to figure out where these players are, who they are, and how we're going to get them. And if we can get them, we got to be able to figure out the salary cap. Can they fit within the budget that we have to work with? And where will we strengthen our position with its free agency and so on and so forth. So my job came in, and immediately I evolved into redeveloping and reorganizing the entire personnel department for as far as pro and as college, and giving Dick Vermeil what he wanted and how he wanted it organized. And we both had the same philosophy. You don't get there without hard work and long hours and finding the right people to work with you and get those things achieved. So originally that was why I was brought in, and that's what we tried to do. We knew, and Dick Vermeil knew, we're not going to achieve any success, first of all, unless we get the key players, the right players in the positions that we need to succeed. And he outlined, and his philosophy is much as mine, same as mine. Like every football team, the quarterback is the key. You're not going to win if you don't have a quarterback. And we proved that, of course, with Kurt Warner, but the quarterback is the key. Then there's some other specific positions you've got to have. You have to have a left tackle. You have to have a center. You have to have an edge pass rushing. You have to have a shutdown corner. All those are key positions. You have to have those key positions. And a quality wide receiver and a quality running back Everybody else you can plug in and fit in, but you got to have those quality top-rate players at those positions if you want to succeed. He recognized that, and I recognize that, and we set off with Chief. Let's find those players, and let's get them in the fold and see what we can achieve. And it's not easy. The first year we were there was a nightmare, and a lot of the time there was a lot of players they weren't accustomed to this kind of an attitude, how to work and how to get things done, what to achieve. And a lot of them were rebelling a little bit and thinking, are we really going to get there doing it this way? And again, as I build on this for a little bit, you'll see it's a success. I'll tell you one little thing about Dick Vermeil. Our coach, great coach. A lot of people had attitude. Is this the right way? Until after they've done it. Every player that ever played for Dick Vermeil worships him, realizes that he had the right attitude and the right means to get it done, and that to achieve the success that individually each one of them wanted to get. So it's an interesting process.
Well, I think of when you said you came in 1997 and the Rams moved from LA in 1989. So it's 8 years later, and you come to a city, you got to have support. Always the St. Louis Cardinals were, the baseball team were always competitive and tough, and they had a great run, obviously, in a great sports town in St. Louis. But the idea of bringing in that short window. So 1997, you guys show up, have a rough first season. But in 1999, you had a phenomenal record, and you positioned yourself to win the Super Bowl that year. Talk to us a little bit about what was that you thought was pivotal in doing it, besides getting the right players in those positions?
So how Dick Vermeil built the football team. When I talk about the football team, I'm talking about a team. I'm not talking about the players specifically on the football field. I'm talking about a football team. Dick Vermeil knew everybody in the organization. He knew the cooks, he knew the strength coaches, he knew the people who were doing the security, he knew them all, he knew their families, and he brought everybody and gave everybody a sense that this is a family organization. We're all going to win together, or we're all going to lose together. And he changed the attitude within the building. So changing the culture of a football team doesn't mean changing the players on the field. It means changing the culture of the organization. Teams learn to and accept losing. They expect to lose. He built the attitude where we didn't accept losing, we expected to win. And you change that by changing everybody's attitude within the organization. He set out to do that with basketball. He would come in, you would go over to Dick Vermeil's house, and he'd be cooking dinner for the security guys or the secretaries or the strength coach or somebody, always building within the organization. So everybody in the organization wanted to achieve the same success that Coach Vermeil, and they wanted to work extra hard to help him get there. And he built that family atmosphere. And that was one of the main things he wanted to change. And I called that the culture of the football team. Not the football team on the field, the culture of the football team, the attitude of the people who work every day trying to get the guy who's parking the cars, the guy who's sweeping the floors, the guy who's doing the security. He wanted all those people involved in our success, and he achieved that. And he achieved that with great leadership. Great leaders are hard to find. They come in every form, and they come in every business. Great leaders come in the military and generals. Great leaders come in industry, and great leaders come in your presidency like we have today in our country. So great leaders, you have to find them, but you develop a culture that takes advantage of your leadership. That's what he did.
I've seen the history of the Rams that they were the first team to go what they call from worst to first. And that was, you show up in 97, and in 1999, 2 years later, your record's 13-3, and you have this quarterback that wasn't a number one draft pick that ended up leading the team amidst the adversity. Talk to us a little bit about that.
That's interesting. We had earmarked a quarterback we thought could take us to where we wanted to go, and that's a kid by the name of Trent Green. Trent Green was going to be our quarterback that year, and in the last preseason game, he gets his knee blown out. And when he gets sacked, they blow out his knee, and that's when Dick Vermeil, in the meeting, he said, we've been practicing and preparing, and we had the right quarterback to take us to where we wanted to go, but we also have the right quarterback still as we've watched the development of Kurt Warner on our practice field, he knows our system, knows what to achieve. He has the skills we're looking for. We can win with Kurt Warner, and of course, the rest is history. But Trent Green was the right guy too. He went on after he recovered from the injury and played very well for the Kansas City Chiefs. And having the right quarterback was the step number one. And Dick Vermeil's commitment to Kurt Warner after Trent Green got hurt was very important towards our development and towards our success. But Ken, you cannot get there without the quarterback, regardless of what anybody says. If you don't have the quarterback, you're not going to win the Super Bowl.
Well, I think what's interesting is when you talk about culture and what that means, teams around the NFL, whether it's Belichick in New England or Kansas City right now, you see the coaches who are committed to winning. They might have a bump here and there in the season or career that has to be rebuilt around the team. When you talk about players having to leave and come and going and salary caps, there's all these moving parts. And but I was curious so your point is, and that was what I wanted. One of my main questions today was Dick Vermeil was key because he was the coach that set everything and set the agenda.
That's correct. He's the key. He's the focal point. Here's the other thing people don't realize about great head coaches. Coach at Kansas City is a classic example. You not only have to coach the players on the football field, you have to coach the coaches. You have to have the right coaches in position. They have to buy into your philosophy. They have to buy into your program. And when that happens, and you are always coaching the coaches. Well, I've seen a lot of coaches, teams that are struggling, and they pick a great offensive coordinator, let's say, for example, off a team. They think he's going to be a great head football coach. That's not necessarily the case. I've seen a lot of great offensive and defensive coordinators. That's what they are. They're great offensive and defensive coordinators. And when they get your chance to be the head football coach, somebody hires them as a head coach because of the success as a coordinator, it doesn't work out. It doesn't work out because they don't have that quality that the great ones have. The Dick Vermeils, Parcells, Belichick. These guys all have a quality of leadership that's hard to find. And the quality of leadership brings people along, brings everybody with you. And that's what Dick Vermeil had. Of course, Tom Landry was probably the first and one of the greatest. And it goes all the way back. If you want to study coaches and leadership, go back to Knute Rockne and Vince Lombardi. And Vince Lombardi his philosophy was there's only one way, it's my way. And if you don't do it my way, we're not going to win. So he was a classic example. That's what Belichick coached. It was his way or the highway, and he was very successful. So there's different ways to achieve it. Dick Vermeil achieved it by having everybody in the organization, in the building, part of the success. They felt they were part of the success, and they were part of the success. And that's the way he wanted to build the team, and that's how he did it.
So, Charlie, we're going to go to the break. We come back. I want to talk about some of the highlights in your mind of that 1999 season. So, Charlie, give us some highlights of that year because they're called the greatest show on turf. And Kurt Warner had this release that was just like he threw like a rocket, but it was so quick. I always think of watching the way Aaron Rodgers flicks the ball and Brett Favre. There's quarterbacks like Carson Wentz. He seemed like to have to wind up almost like a pitcher. Kurt Warner, it just seemed like he threw darts and it was a great season as a young Rams fan. I wasn't that young in those days anymore. I had so many disappointing seasons like all these North Dakota Viking fans. But they finally did it. You played a part in it. Talk to us about some highlights.
Maybe one of the biggest highlights was our ability to trade for Marshall Faulk. Marshall Faulk is a great running back. And of course, he's a Hall of Fame running back. We were able to trade the Indianapolis Colts for Marshall Faulk, and we gave him a 4th-round draft pick. And they were having difficulty signing his contract. And when we sat down and talked about it, we knew we had the cap space, and we knew we had the commitment, and we knew that was one of the factors that could help us achieve success is having a quality running back. A quality running back is not a guy that you can just run the ball up inside. It's a guy that you can spit him out. He can be a receiver. He's smart. He's intelligent. And he's capable of making the big plays. And he was one of the factors that we were able to achieve that brought into the football team and made a significant difference towards success. Another factor is we had a great wide receiver and Isaac Bruce, and he was a great wide receiver, but everybody's double covering him. And we knew in the draft, talking with Coach Vermeil and getting ready to draft, there was a lot of great players. Everybody thought we were going to take Champ Bailey, but in my discussion with Vermeil, we convinced each other that in order to make Isaac the player that he's going to be, we had to find some way to take the pressure off him. That's why we drafted Torrey Holt. And then, of course, when we drafted Torrey Holt, they could no longer just cover Isaac Bruce. And then with Torrey Holt on one side, Isaac on the other side, it became a much faster game for us because the speed of and the skill of the two players. And of course, they were a big factor in our steps toward the fastest team during that period on the football field and the fastest team on turf, I guess they call us. But getting those key factors are very important. We had already committed it when we came in and drafted our left tackle in Orlando Pace with the first pick. Everybody says, you're going to take a left tackle with the first pick? And Dick Vermeil, yeah, we're going to take the left tackle first pick. If we can't protect the quarterback, we can't win. He made those kind of decisions. He made those decisions easy. My job was to make sure we had the people in the right position. When he made the decision, we had the right players that would improve our football team. And those are a couple of factors that really helped us and really achieve the next step, bring us up to that next step of excellence. And so there was 4 or 5 of those type of commitments that we had to make. And we were always scouring the free agency market, trying to find another player here, another player there that would help us achieve success, not only on offense, but as well on defense. And so that's a big factor. Make sure you understand who the players are, where the players are, and your ability and how to get those players to achieve your success.
So, Charlie, I think a lot of us probably didn't really know unless you're really intimately in the game, the left tackle. In other words, until that movie Blindside came out. And of course, it's Hollywood doing their thing. But when that happens, and they helped us educate us in that process, obviously good coaches knew that. And I think you said in a previous show that if you got a left-handed quarterback, it's the right tackle. But getting Orlando Pace to protect Kurt Warner, whatever your quarterback is, that becomes critical. So explain a little bit of what that means on the blind side in protecting that left tackle, why that role plays a part of it, just for viewers that maybe don't understand all of that.
Yeah, I'll give you another. We had the same problem with the Patriots. We had a left tackle, Bruce Armstrong, and we had our quarterback, and and Drew Bledsoe was developing into quite a good quarterback for us, took us to a Super Bowl. But our question was at the left tackle again. Always get back to when you're playing a quarterback, can you protect him? Always starts with the left tackle. And Bruce Armstrong, all the years he played for us at New England, never gave up a single sack on our quarterback. Orlando Pace, all the years he played for us when I was there, never gave up a single sack on our quarterback. Again, it's a position you have to have if you want success. And because it's true, it's the blind side. The quarterback seldom sees what's happening on that side of the ball. And if you've got a shut down left tackle, he makes it a lot easier for him to achieve success. And if you watch great teams, always at some point during the game, they talk about the left tackle, the great left tackle. This is a Pro Bowl. This is a Hall of Fame left tackle. So it's a key position. You can't win without. You can't help both the left tackle and the right tackle when the ball is snapped. You're going to chip on the right tackle and help him. But if the left tackle can shut that position down, it makes your chances of achieving success much easier. So same thing on though if you're on the other side of the ball and you got the hybrid pass rusher. Every team looks for that guy that can rush the passer, and you've seen some great ones over the year. But every team that has a hybrid pass rusher has a chance to enjoy success on defense. Doesn't mean they're going to win offensively, but they can achieve success on defense. And teams that have a hybrid pass rusher always play well on defense because it takes the pressure off everyone else and puts the pressure on the offensive team. And Garrett for the Cleveland Browns is an example. He wrecks the game for the offense on the other team. And he's just one big part of the puzzle. But when you get all those guys together, you have a chance to build a football team on both sides of the ball that helps you achieve success. We had that and it wasn't by accident. It was by identifying those players and getting them in position for our success.
You talk about leadership with Dick Vermeil and so often the culture in a locker room that I would like you to speak to a little bit. Carson Wentz is taking hits where sometimes they say he's not the best guy in the locker room, and whether it's media or not. But when you hear those stories over, talk to us a little bit about Kurt Warner. Here, this guy doesn't have the background to come from a Division I school, and he was checking out groceries, working and coach, playing around the world, and coming into the NFL and playing that part. How strong of a leader was he in the locker room when he became the starting quarterback compared to what you might have seen elsewhere?
Yeah, the quarterback's a unique position. But the quarterback, you don't have success, you earn success. You earn respect. You earn the players looking up to you as a leader. And Kurt Warner had that in the ACC. He was a very humble young man, highly religious, very thoughtful of everybody, committed to each and every one of his players. They saw his leadership, his ability to communicate with everybody on the offensive side of football and as well as on the defensive side of football. But you have that leadership quality and you earn that respect. And you hear them talk about that. That player will earn that quarterback a lot of respect. You earn that respect. You're not given that respect. And the one quality that Kurt Warner had, he was electric in the huddle. People believed him. When he spoke, they listened, and they knew that he was speaking because he was successful and could lead them to success. You earn that. Tom Brady had that same quality, and Joe Montana. There's so many that have that quality. They may not be the greatest in some areas, but they have a leadership quality that's hard to overcome. That leadership quality goes in all fields. If you studied Patton, when you studied generals, he had that leadership quality. The soldiers who fought under George Patton would have done anything for George Patton. And that's the same thing about the quarterback. So you find leadership, you study leadership, you study the skills it takes to be a great leader, and you understand those skills. And some people, it's just natural. It was natural for Kurt Warner. He was a natural leader. It exhibited confidence, and the people around him just rose up to his standard of playing the position. So it's a leadership question and how they achieve it. Some people, it's really natural. Other people have to work at it. But you can still succeed as a great quarterback without that quality, but it makes it a lot easier when you get everybody on board because they're all pulling for you to succeed. And he had that quality.
So, Charlie, we're going to go to the break. We come back. I want to zero in on the playoffs, working through. You have a 13-3 season, and I'd like to talk through the playoffs a little bit. Some people remember every play of every game. I don't have that capacity. I can't hardly remember what I did yesterday. But some people do, and I'd like to get some thoughts from you when you guys beat the Vikings in the first round and end up playing the next one with the Buccaneers and then getting to the Super Bowl, and I'd like to talk about those specifics. So, Charlie, I want to talk about the playoffs. Here in North Dakota, everybody loves the Vikings. I was one of those few Ram fans. And the first playoff game, you guys end up taking out the Vikings. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because you're a North Dakota kid. I imagine there were some people like your brother Dick, who's probably a Vikings fan. Maybe he was. Maybe he's a Cowboys fan. But anyway, talk to us a little bit about the playoffs and what you recall about it.
It's interesting, right? I had my brother at that game as my guest, and he's rooting for the Vikings. He was a Viking fan. I said, you can't root for the Vikings. We're trying to beat them so we can continue to go on and get into the Super Bowl. But everything went really smooth when we played the Vikings. Everything seemed to fall in place, and we were able to win the game. But it always struck me as funny. He's in box with me watching the game, and he's hoping that the Vikings can somehow pull the game out. And I think he doesn't really hope that. He's just pulling my chain a little bit. But that was an interesting factor. But the playoff game that really made a difference was the Tampa game. They had a really good defensive football team, and that game was nip and tuck. And the interesting fact about that game, we had the two great wide receivers, and we had a third wide receiver, and they're double covering somehow. They're bracketing by two wide receivers. The guy who catches the winning touchdown that game is our third wide receiver. Ricky Prohl, and it's the only touchdown pass he caught that year, and he caught it in that Tampa Bay game because they were double covering our two and bracketing our two great wide receivers, and he caught in the left end zone to cut the winning touchdown. But a factor that was a key in that game is when the kid from Tampa caught the ball and they ruled that the ball had hit the ground and ruled it incomplete. On today's rule, he didn't lose control of the ball when it hit the ground. So under today's rule, that would have been ruled as completed catch. So some strange things happened in playoffs, but it went pretty smooth. Getting into the Super Bowl and enjoying that year and the march towards the Super Bowl was amazing. I remember on that first game we were playing, I think we were playing Baltimore. And of course, Baltimore is a 3 or 4 touchdown favorite, and we really came through and just walked right over Baltimore. And I saw the coach for Baltimore afterwards. He had no idea what kind of a team you guys had until this thing was over. But achieving success, having the whole thing put together, then seeing them achieve their next step, the championship steps, going against Minnesota, then against Tampa, and then of course then getting into the Super Bowl. It was a very rewarding time for us and quite a successful thing. It brought everything together. It brought together the focal point of what Dick Vermeil was trying to achieve and how to get us there. And it's all now his whole philosophy, his whole theory about building a team around the coaches and players, the building, the secretaries all came to develop together and were successful. So it was fun to see that run and overcome some of the obstacles we had to get there and achieve that success.
You guys beat the Titans, I think 23-16 when I looked at kind of the record to end up winning that Super Bowl. What's the whole feel? You have this career, you spend your whole career wanting to win a Super Bowl. And ultimately getting there. Can you describe that emotion of what that actually feels like on the team, the coach, even yourself personally?
It's amazing. The last play of the game, when we made that tackle on the 1 yard line. The kid who made that tackle played at Missouri as a fullback. We got him into Rams and made him a linebacker, and he made the great tackle go down in Rams history as one of the greatest plays. But that was an unbelievable feeling, the ups and downs. We were rolling along. The catch that Isaac made, the 75-yard catch, and Kurt Warner threw the ball under heavy pressure. He was hit just as he was throwing the ball and made the play. Everything seemed to fall in place, and that was great. We had lost to that team earlier in the season, so being able to beat them in the Super Bowl was quite an achievement. And of course, it capped off for us in the belief of what Dick Vermeil had achieved and where he was taking us as a football team. And sadly, that was probably the last team he ever coached with the Rams. I think if Dick Vermeil had stayed with the Rams, we probably would have won 2 or 3 more Super Bowls because he built the football team in his image. And this has nothing to do with saying anything about any other coaches or anything, but this was Dick Vermeil's football team, how he built it. Remember when Vince Lombardi left the Green Bay Packers as a championship team, the guy that followed him had a tough time. It's hard to follow in the footsteps of somebody who's had that kind of success because the N2 starts to slip. It isn't the same. And so it's harder to maintain that success after the leader, after the guy who organized it, developed it, is gone. It's hard to maintain that success. I could see that developing within our football team, within our organization. I could see that starting to slip away after we won the Super Bowl.
So Mike Martz was the offensive coordinator, if I recall, in that season, and then went on to be the head coach the next year, correct?
And Mike was an excellent offensive coordinator. This is not fair to Coach Martz. We had a really good football team the first year. We lost to the Carolina, a game that would have probably put us in the Super Bowl. And of course, the next year we lose to the Patriots, as we were talking about. But again, as I studied the whole thing, I could see the thing starting to slip. It didn't have the same pizzazz, however you want to call it, as it had when Dick was the captain of the ship. And that's not saying that Mark Martz wasn't a great football coach. He was especially a coordinator. He was an outstanding coordinator. For us, he made the right decisions, got the right things, plays on the field, and had the confidence of our quarterback and our receivers offensively. So that, and Marshall Faulk was a big key for Mike Martz when we were winning, and just wasn't the same without Dick Vermeil at the hill.
I wonder just the idea of winning it, and everything builds to this pinnacle that you hit, and then all of a sudden there's the letdown, and to be repeat and Super Bowl champions, that's a big deal. That's very difficult to do that, isn't it? Because of the letdown and the energy to pull that off, and you hit it, and now it's, okay, we're going to do it again, but you don't have that same drive, do you?
You think you have the same drive, but everything's not the same. And in our case, removing Dick Vermeil, his input, his leadership was probably the biggest factor for us. But we still had a great football team. The next year, we had a team that could have been undefeated, and we lost the last game of the year to a team in Detroit that had only won 2 games. It's just not the same. It's just hard to say that it's not the same team. It's not the same leadership. The attitude is a little bit different, and it's very hard to achieve that kind of success and maintain the stability like they did at the New England Patriots for all those years. That's important. And they did it at San Francisco for years. They've done it in Pittsburgh, but they didn't change. Nothing changed at the top. That's the key in maintaining that. And we could have maintained that and probably should have maintained that had Dick Vermeil stayed.
You know, I want to bring a picture up here, Charlie. I was being a Rams fan. I remember the next year, it was like I was thinking the Rams are going to be in for about 3 to 5 years. To your point, you addressed that it didn't happen because I remember I was at a conference in San Diego. This room's full of 200-300 people, big screen, and get down to the last play of the game, and this guy that we're going to take a picture of, that we're going to bring up here, I ended up getting a picture with him like 15 years later, Adam Vinatieri, who ended up kicking the field goal to beat the Rams as New England Patriot field goal kicker. And this picture was 15 years later. I was at a trade show, and they said there's this New England Patriot back there getting a picture with people. And I thought, yeah, maybe I'll do it. Maybe, no, I don't think so. I'm never really one of those stargazers. But anyway, they told me who it was, and I go, I got to tell this guy how he disappointed me. And I wasn't a big fan of his. So tell us a little bit of story about Adam Vinatieri.
That's an interesting story. Before I came to the Rams, I was a personnel guy at the Patriots. I signed Adam Vinatieri over in NFL Europe to be our kicker for the Patriots. And as I was telling you during the break, that Patriot team that beat us in the Super Bowl, I had signed or drafted 28 of the players that were on that football team that we lost to. So I think there was a big article written about it at one point. And I think in one of the Boston newspapers, where I had a hand in both teams, that the winning team and the losing team in the Super Bowl. Interesting thing about the Super Bowl, just go show you how things change. We had played the Patriots about 6 weeks earlier, and we really, in New England, and we just hammered them in New England. And Marshall Faulk rushed for 170 yards, I think, in that game in New England. And for some reason, when we get into the Super Bowl, we're in Marshall Faulk's hometown in New Orleans. For some reason, didn't work out. We didn't use Marshall Faulk in the ball game to help control the game. I think in the first half, he only had 2 carries for 17 yards. And that's not, again, funny how things break, but we had a running back that controlled the football game for us. Had we used Marshall Faulk, maybe we win the game, maybe we don't. But that was an interesting point of view that the kid who beat us, I signed for the New England Patriots. That was an interesting fact. I took a little ribbing on that, of course, as you do.
I am sure you did. Charlie, this has been a fascinating show talking about winning the Super Bowl. I want to do one more show with you, and next week we're going to cover, we're just going to grab some players and we're going to talk about it, and I want to get your opinions because I know you're a very candid guy that will say what's on your mind. You're respectful, just like your brother Dick was, but he was honest about things in politics, and I sometimes think in football, it'd be just good to get some untarnished, just say what's on your mind, ask you about some players, get some feedback. I like to talk about current quarterbacks, current players, just to get some feedback on the game. So we're going to do that next week.
That'll be fine. When I was the general manager at Rams, the press had a nickname for me. They called me Mr. Blunt. So
Mr. Blunt.
when they asked me a question, I always give them an honest answer.
That's what we're going to do. Next week, we're going to be talking to Mr. Blunt. So, Charlie, thank you for joining us. We've been talking to Charley Armey on the Horn. I'm your host, Gary Emmett. Thanks for watching.